when is it beneficial? So we had agreed that when the qualification needs to be upgraded as dictated by the professional standards.
Okay.
That might be a very good reason why you would need to. If it's a regulated profession, or if your home education has been assessed and you are seen wanting, so maybe IQAS or WES say it's not really equivalent, maybe you need to do a couple of courses to meet the Canadian standard, then that might be a good reason.
Yeah.
And then how can you help them make this decision? I think it's really having the client understand the dynamics, the different dynamics, right?
Okay.
Because it's again having to change your mindset that here, as Javier said, having if going for a master's or going for a PhD will only make you overqualified.
Yes.
Whereas what you need is really the experience and the network and anything else.
Yeah. So yeah, what happens if people go through for more and more education and without really having a plan for that, how they're going to use that education? Yeah, waste of time, waste of money, resources, yes, and creating even more of a problem for themselves. I mean, I've seen people who keep adding letters after their names, and they're no better off because they're fundamentally working on the wrong issue. They think that getting more technical skills will make them more employable, when in fact they need to work on their soft skills. So they don't need another master's degree, they need Toastmasters. Oh, no? Yes, sorry. Yeah. Please.
So I've seen some job postings that will say a degree or a diploma, but they will say from a recognized institution. So I feel like sometimes people will go back to school because maybe my education is from down under. So you know what I mean? So I think that the employers themselves specifying that might lead people into going back into school.
So how do you know whether it's going to be beneficial or not?
They were job and applying for job description.
So, Anita, go ahead.
Yeah, you need to experience first, right? And look for job and apply for jobs to really understand if you have chance or not getting the job, right?
So how do you know if you have a chance? Because I mean, if you apply and you get rejected, there's so many reasons that can tell you that could be the reason why you're rejected, that it's hard to pin it down to one factor. So the key networking is definitely one critical element. If you talk to several people in your field and they'll tell you, oh, you're going to need X, or like 3 out of 4 tell you you're going to need X designation, whatever, that's probably a good idea. The other one is simply do labor market research. I mean, I remember, so I'll give you one example. One person I worked with she was from Iraq. She was in the IT world, but on the hardware part. Like she would fix computers, but changing, hard drives and stuff like that. Okay? And I remember, she said, she told me I need an A+ certification. Mm-hmm. I had never heard of that thing, and my first reaction was, "Are you sure?" Yeah. And she said, "Yeah, I think so." I said, "Well, all right, prove it to me." Okay? I told her, take 50 job postings. What percentage of these job postings require, job postings, and specifically in that job, obviously, what percentage of them say you have to have that A+ certification? If the answer is 80+%, then yeah, you're right. And in her case, that was exactly the case. She looked at 50 job postings, and at least 40 said you need an A+. It was one of the must-have. All right, done. Go for it. If on the other hand, less than 20% of the job postings say you need it, then you don't really have to. Okay, and it's not one. So this is where the challenge. Yes, some employers say you need, and for example, Procter & Gamble was notorious for that. We would hire only at the entry level, but only from Waterloo, U of T, McGill, UBC, and I can't remember, there was one fifth one, and that was it. If you had a degree from another university, that was not considered as good enough, kind of thing. Okay, so that does happen, but that is the exception. in my experience, that is the exception. Most of the time, people will not judge you based on which university did you get your degree from. It's what did you do with that degree. And so the key question will be, what have you done? So for many people, in my experience, getting practical experience will be more valuable than getting another degree. And we're getting into, if you don't mind, do you want to describe your situation? Because what we were discussing at break, at lunchtime, I think it's a fantastic example of that.
Okay, so I actually had approached Lionel with the personal question, and I gave him my background. So I actually come from a journalism background, so I studied journalism. And I actually got to work at Post Media, so I was working at the Calgary Herald and the Calgary Sun. But then I realized, still trying to, because my end goal is communications, not to work as a journalist or covering news and stuff. So my end goal is communication. So I was thinking maybe I should...
what kind of communications you mentioned?
Corporate communications. Corporate communications. So I was like, okay, so maybe in order for me to boost myself up, I need to get a master's in journalism. But that is completely useless because, that's just what I've heard from consulting with some editors. Even my editor back home was like, that will be a complete use of time. It will cost me about $17,000. So, and my research on looking for job postings that want corporate communicators, the thing that they explicitly want is an accreditation or a designation with the communication body. So that is the one thing that is sought after. So my question to Lionel was, what would one rather go for? And having this conversation is completely clear that the designation, yes. And then combine that with the experience, not to get a master degree to be, equal with my peers back home because you went to Canada, you didn't pursue a master's degree, you didn't do this. But no, it's because it's not going to work for me. So understanding that, I think, is beginning to help me.
Yeah. So it is fundamental. So this is one fundamental question. So we discussed yesterday Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. You know that book, I'm sure. So yesterday we talked about the circle of influence, control, and concern. Today, one very important point. In the book, he talks about start with the end in mind. And I really want to encourage you as counselors, fundamentally ask your clients, if you go and get that degree, what will you do with it? 3 years after you graduate, what kind of position do you want to have? And then work backwards. Do you need that degree to get to that position? Because sometimes the degree is the wrong thing, sometimes it's the right thing. It really depends. Okay? But if people say, I want to get a degree, and you ask them why, and they kind of go, because, then no, that's not a good reason. The degree, so the question is the degree the goal, or the degree is a step towards a goal? If it is a step towards a specific goal, then yes, that makes sense. If the degree is the goal, then that's the wrong approach. I experienced it. So with I remember part of the reasons I'm doing this kind of work was when I worked at P&G and at Xerox, my career was not moving as fast as I thought it should, and definitely not as fast as it would have if I'd worked for a French company. I remember being frustrated with that. I remember saying well, I'll go get an MBA. So many immigrants will say that. Yeah. And then I talked to my wife. My wife said, no. If you're going to get an MBA, you're first going to figure out what you're going to do when you have that MBA. Mm-hmm. And then you'll determine whether you actually need one or not. And I actually did the research and I realized, no, that would have been the wrong direction. So I really encourage you to ask your clients, what are you going to do with that degree? If the degree is a step towards a specific goal, go for it. If it is an end in itself, it's probably the wrong thing to do. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, sorry, let me get you that.
So just to add to your comment on should I get Masters of Journalism, look at what peers who are working in the roles you want, go creep their LinkedIn profiles and see what credentials they have. I just looked at a peer in communications. She's a member of the International Business Communications Association. Nobody in this organization working in communications has a master's degree. From the VP to the director, they all have marketing and business education backgrounds, and some layout design. But the journalism, I don't. Again, so it's like, look what credential of people who are actually actively working in the field are doing, not what someone's outside the field is telling you what to do.
Yes, absolutely. So that's the market research. Okay. Now, one important thing is, let's say people have decided, yes, it is the right thing to do. How should they study in order to maximize the return on that investment? Let me give you this thing.
I would then say by choosing a field of speciality in their field.
Absolutely. So because I have seen people go get a master's degree, but they study at their master's level like they still end up as a generalist because they took one course in every sub-discipline of their work, of their field. So in accounting, they would take one course in financial analysis, audit, and so again, by the time they graduate, they are still a generalist, but at a higher level. Okay? As opposed to, I remember a guy in mechanical engineering, he did a master's degree, and he took one course from each area within mechanical engineering. By the time he graduated, he was still a generalist, even though he had a master's degree. So yes, targeting a specific specialization. In other words, your degree should be a step towards demonstrating your specialization. So that means concentrating your efforts in one area. That means networking with people within that area. That means not putting all your efforts in getting as high a GPA as possible. Because that's usually the way many immigrants will study. I'm going to try to get as high a GPA as possible. Because back home, that will get you the job. Here, I have never been asked my GPA by anyone.
Only an entry level interview is going to care about GPA. If it's your first job out of university, maybe, but
yeah. Even there, I mean, so many people will not ask for GPA at all. But it may happen at the entry level, as you said, but it's even there, it's the exception rather than the rule in my experience. And as soon as it's no longer an entry level, then forget it. The question will be, what did you do? So GPA, so obviously you still need to pass. I mean, that's an obvious. So there's minimum, like you still need to do some work. But the point is, as long as you have, a good enough average, good enough meaning like you pass a little bit above, that's it. All your extra effort should be invested in the soft skill part of the studies. Networking with other students, networking with professors. In particular, very important point. Encourage, like when immigrants study, I really encourage them to study live, not online. Why? Because it is interactive. Yes, interactive, so you get to communicate with people, you practice communication in your field, and you create a network. This is the biggest thing. Online, you will not create a network. Okay? I like to say online dating only goes so far. Okay? You need to meet people. And it is really critical. So really encourage your clients to do live studies, classroom studies, as opposed to online. I mean, if you're only studying like something like statistics and you need one specific piece of knowledge, fine. But if it is truly a degree, a diploma, or something like this, I really encourage people to be like, in particular, part-time studies are wonderful because most of the people who study part-time have a job.
Yeah.
And what does it mean? Well, you're networking with people who have a job. This is extremely helpful to understand like how to get into the field, how people think, how they evaluate, and so on. Yeah. So, classroom studies, I think, and part-time is really helpful in that respect. Yeah. And focusing not on the GPA, but on the soft skill elements of the job. Creating a network, volunteering in the student association, because there's going to be one. That's another way of learning all these elements. Okay. So how do you help them make this decision? Remember the key question: what are you going to do with that degree? Okay. Is the degree the end, the goal, or is it a step towards something? Because if it's the goal, then that's probably not a good idea. It is really important because, again, if I take the example of project management, like you tell the average immigrant, you need to improve your project management skill. What's the first reaction people will have?
They will take the certification.
Exactly.
Yeah.
PMP.
Yeah.
Okay, I need that PMP certification. No, you can study project management you can develop your project management skills in many other ways that do not involve adding letters after your name. How could someone improve their project management skills without adding letter like PMP after their name? Anyone? Yes?
We've done with my husband a project at home. We renovated the house.
Yes?
I needed to learn everything. I mean, from getting people to work to financials and everything.
Start over again, just like
So
Yeah.
my husband and I decided to renovate the place by ourselves, do it alone. And so I needed to understand how is to find people to work, contractors, how to manage the financing portion of it, and even just how to deal with being late and not to, meeting the deadlines. That was a project management skill set I definitely developed during that project.
Yeah. You fundamentally, so you practice.
Yeah.
You can volunteer for a not-for-profit association where you manage a project. You can, for example, you can manage the United Way campaign in your company. If you're like, you can read a book on the topic. You can take an online course. You can join, you can take one course specifically on that topic, as opposed to getting the degree or the certification. Okay? This is the big thing. People equate, many immigrants, including myself when I arrived in Canada, will equate learning a skill and getting some piece of paper that demonstrates you have it. But in Canada, the piece of paper is not what demonstrates you have the skill. What demonstrates you have the skill is you've done it and you can describe how you did it. And that is what will give you that experience. Yes, let me get past it. Yeah.
You were talking about project management, and then the PMP had really had a new book, had changed everything about project management. And then I have some of these new migrants coming here, they have heard about that, and I said to them, yeah, not much was changed, it's just that the agile portion was added. And it's like, oh, we didn't know that one, that agile one. Then you don't have to get the whole thing.
Yeah.
You just get that particular one.
That's right.
Because that's the only thing different.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's important when they're trying to get certification. If they have revamped something on that certification, try to find the difference, what was added, and just take that portion,
Exactly.
not the whole thing.
Exactly. So it's really being strategic about what is different, what is useful, how will you apply it? Because, I mean, if you're not going to, if you work in an area where Agile is not used, you don't even need to do that.
That's true.
Yeah, so there is one other situation I've seen where people get, it helps, and it's along those lines. It's people in the IT sector, for example, they are MCSE, Microsoft Certified Software Engineer, or MCAD, something like Microsoft Certified Application Developer, something like this. But their certification is on an older version of Windows. So maybe they need to upgrade to the latest version of Windows, kind of thing. Okay? Yes. And then that can make a difference. But again, we're talking about upgrade, not talking about going back from scratch.
Yes.
Okay? So questions or comments on this one? Yes, Frank, go ahead.
In my organization, we treat the specialization like the first stepping stone, because that gives it the fundamental and the foundation about the concepts.
Yeah.
So the application of that is different. So that's when you get the real Canadian experience, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it's when you do it. I mean, Canadian experience is you're doing it, and you can describe how you did it the way Canadians do. Yeah. Okay. Yes, go ahead. Like, please. Like.
Also, some of the students doesn't want to start working. Like some of my clients doesn't want working because they want to get funding because they think that when they have a job, they will not be able to get as much fund as when they don't have a job.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Okay.
That's a different issue. That's a different issue.
Yeah. So and that's one of the one of the reason that they're going to give me in taking courses. And I said, like, that's not a good enough reason for me.
For sure.
I said, it's just that education has a purpose. You have a purpose for this.
Yeah.
If you're just taking it because it's there, it's available, and I can get funding for it to study, then no.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, some people become professional students, in essence.
There you go.
Okay? I mean, it's like they're very good at studying, but yeah. So, Osama, what's the challenge?
Huh?
What's the challenge?
We don't know why they want the license.
And this is going to be very typical. I'm sure you've all seen people like that. Fundamentally, the people confuse the goal, intermediate goals, and final goals. And the license in that case becomes the same as a degree in the other case. So in other words, they're here, they want to go there, which is get a job in most cases. They think an intermediate goal will be a degree or a license, when in reality, that degree or that license will take them in a completely different direction. And the challenge, so this is where understanding why exactly, as you say, like we don't understand why. Well, this is the question you would ask.
Yeah.
What's your goal?
Yeah.
What do you want to do with that license? Because in Osama's case, like it's going to take him way longer to get a license than a job.
Yes.
He can get a job in technical sales way more easily than he will be able to get a license. So in his case, that would be a complete waste of time. It will actually slow him down significantly. David, go for it. But why does he want a license? It's the same question. You're on the right track. He wants it because his wife wants him to have it. In real life, that was the situation. Okay? His wife really wanted him to get the license. So I'm sure you've all heard the saying, happy wife, happy life. Okay? So what he did was, if I remember correctly, he got one of the organizations, because as an electrician, he was working with engineering consulting firms that would design things. So he essentially got a job in one of those companies, like for 12 months, because all he was lacking was the 12 months of Canadian experience. So he worked for that company 12 months, and then during the day he was doing the job as an engineer. During the night he was doing the work as the manager of his company. And then when he got 12 months, done. He left and he got he applied for the license and done. He went back to managing his company. Okay. Hamed, what's the challenge there? Age is good. Yeah. Why is that? Well, how long does it take to become a medical doctor?
10 years.
Yeah, it's going to be a long time. Even if he's able to do it, assuming that he can do it, it's still going to take a long time, like the order of 5 to 10 years. So what it means is by the time he graduates, it's going to be time to retire.
Yes. Yeah.
It's not going to work. Okay? The other thing is, it is quite difficult for, there are a number of medical doctors who were trained outside of Canada, who go through fundamentally they have to do the internship again. So they kind of start at that level. So it takes them several years. Most of the people who end up becoming medical doctors in Canada through that route are actually people who grew up in Canada, who went to study medicine somewhere else come back to Canada.
Yeah.
And so they are technically immigrants. I mean, like, well, no, they are international medical graduates because they did get their degree somewhere else.
Yes.
But they grew up in Canada, which means they have Canadian soft skills.
Yeah.
And so as a result, the odds of somebody who grew up outside of Canada, who got a medical degree outside of Canada, and to become a medical doctor are really low. It's very hard.
And to add on that point, there is an association for those IMGs, the internationally trained doctors. It's called AIMGA here in Calgary.
Yes.
They had a symposium and they actually revealed that the quota for the residency, because every physician needs to have that 1 year residency in a hospital, right? The quota is 10% for IMGs.
Yeah.
So you're competing with 90% of Canadian medical graduates who are probably in their 20s or 30s.
Yeah, exactly. So it is very difficult. So there, for somebody like Ahmed, obviously, alternative career options will be the way to go in most cases. I mean, like, I've seen people who were like medical doctors in other countries become medical doctors again. Well, the people I've seen were much younger than that. Okay? And so it is possible, but it's very difficult. But I mean, in a situation like this, definitely looking into alternatives. So yes, IMGA, the Association of International Medical Graduates of Alberta, if I remember correctly, the acronym, is like, if you have somebody like this, refer them to that association, because this is fairly specialized, obviously. There's a number of options. Like, I mean, one is medical research. Another one would be a sales representative for medical equipment, pharmaceutical products. Another one would be, I've seen some become paramedic or like medical radiation technologist. Like, quite often that will depend on their soft skills and their English level of English as well. Yeah. Some can become technical, essentially, like work on something really technical. It reduces the need for English. Yeah. It was really interesting because the real life person, his reaction was, well, if I can't become a medical doctor, his father was raising horses, like he had a ranch. So his reaction was, oh, I'll raise horses. And I thought, well, there's things in between medical doctor and horse ranching kind of thing. You can look at something, and that is an important point. It's what I find is, as a counselor, one big goal is to try to salvage as much as possible of the person's experience and education, because as opposed to throwing everything away and starting from scratch. Because a number of people will have that reaction. Okay, well, if I can't do this, start all over again. Well, hang on a second. There's a lot of things between where you were and starting all over again. So let's try to figure out what can be recovered. And I find this is part of to me, is the fun part of being the counselor. It's you take the person's experience, you break it down into small pieces, and then you reassemble these pieces into a different job. And now, what job? Like, that's where the creativity comes in. Okay, like you have to have the idea, but that can be a lot of fun. Okay. So, question? Yes, go ahead.
Just remember something. I have a family doctor, a new arrival family doctor. That was last year ago. So he wants to continue with, like, he was so insistent on being a doctor, but. Like I said to you, his soft skills are not that good, and all of that. So what happened is I said to him, okay, so why do you want to be a family doctor? Because the cannabis, I want to be able to talk to them about that, because that's what his campaign on his home country, to use it as an alternative medicine.
Yeah.
So I was just like, based on my research, you don't need a license to coach people about the proper use of it. I was like, oh.
Yes.
And then he ended up doing that. He ended up doing that Harvard Medical Clinic.
That's great.
And he was so happy about it. And that's the thing too. It's the questions. You really have to really dip dig deeper
Yes.
with their purpose.
Yeah.
At first, he doesn't want to talk to me about cannabis
Yeah.
and all, but I keep on digging and digging, and then he's suddenly blurt that out
Yeah.
that he wants to advocate for that, and he was that's his advocacy on his home country as an alternative medicine and all those kind of things. So he thinks that he can't make a difference if he doesn't have the license. I was like, no, there you go.
Yeah. So yes, digging and going into the details, absolutely, and figuring out, well, maybe you don't need. Again, we come back to, like, for him, getting the becoming a medical doctor would take him years and would actually slow him down instead of speeding up the process of getting to his goal. So that, yes, that's a great example. Actually, another thing that some medical doctors, IMGs, will end up doing is public health. So they'll work in the, kind of the Ministry of Health or something like that. Exactly, that kind of thing. Yeah. Questions or comments on this one? We're good? So let's talk a little bit about regulatory bodies. Have you ever asked yourself, why do we have so many regulatory bodies in Canada?
Yep.
Why?
Protect the public.
Yeah, but that is universal.
Yeah.
Okay, like French people want to be French people wants to be protected from accountants, engineers, and rogue accountants and rogue medical doctors. But why do we have so many regulatory bodies in Canada, whereas there's not nearly as many in Western European countries or even the US?
Good question.
No, I don't think so. I mean, well, there's a lot of immigrants in France. Okay, like legal and illegal, but that's a different story. But there's a lot of immigrants in France. No, that's not really the issue.
Is that in fact true? We have more regulatory
Oh, yeah.
organizations here
There's
than-
tons of professions that are regulated in Canada that are not regulated in other countries. Even in France, even in Western European countries. Okay, lots of them. Like, I don't know about Alberta, but in Ontario, I think there's almost 60 regulatory bodies.
Wow.
Okay? And to the best of my knowledge, medical doctors are regulated around the world. That one is definitely. But engineering is a good example, is not regulated in France, whereas it is regulated here in Canada. Yeah, exactly, same thing. So why are there so many regulatory bodies in Canada when other developed nations don't have nearly as many?
We like regulations.
No. So so you got to go back to when were they created? What was the context? So let's go back to this. When were regulatory bodies created? When was not CPA itself, but CA or CGA?
They go back almost 100 years.
Yes, exactly. They go back 100 years. Most of them go back about 100 years. And all regulatory bodies came from one fundamental point, need, exactly what you said, protect the public.
Right.
Okay? Fundamentally, what happened is this. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, all developed countries run into the same problem. You have people with specialized knowledge that the average person cannot evaluate. Because up to that point, everybody can pretty much evaluate everybody else's knowledge. Okay? Like, are you a good baker? Well, I can tell. All I have to do is taste what you mean. Are you a good butcher? I can tell. But now we have people like engineers, accountants, and medical doctors. The average person cannot tell whether the person is doing a good job or not. And if they do a bad job, people die. So we need to find a solution to make sure these people do a good job. So the problem was universal. The solution was not. The solution in many Western European nations was inspection. We're going to have inspectors who will make sure people do their job properly. But inspection in a Canadian context in the late 1800s or early 1900s made no sense. Why?
Geography.
Exactly.
Too big.
Transportation was, like, just to go in the early 1900s, to go from Toronto to Thunder Bay would take a whole week. So sending an inspector to go make sure that whoever has calculated the bridge has done a good job, that makes no sense. But the need was there. Let me give you some examples. Does any of you know what this picture represents?
Yeah.
So what is it?
I don't recall the bridge. It's iron bridge, as the engineers call it.
Exactly.
They make their rings out of the metal from the
Exactly.
when they complete their.
Exactly. So this is the bridge. This is the reason why there is there are engineering associations. Okay. So this bridge was built across the St. Lawrence River in Quebec City.
Yeah.
Somebody miscalculated, and the bridge was heavier than planned by some really large amount, like 180,000 pounds or some astronomical number. The bridge collapsed. And most importantly, something like 85 people died. Mm-hmm. Now, 85 people at a time when the population of Canada was a quarter of what it is today. So the equivalent in today's term is 340 people died. Imagine an industrial accident in Canada today, 340 people die. That would be a national catastrophe. And everybody would go, how do we make sure it doesn't happen again? Well, that's how regulatory bodies came up. So the solution, yes, and this is the bridge. So I don't know whether it's true or not, but the idea is when engineers get this iron ring, the iron comes from that bridge.
Or represents that.
I don't know if it still comes from there. Originally it did, but now it represents that bridge again. And they tried again, like 12 years later, and it failed again. And that time only 15 people died. Yeah, it's like it doesn't always work. In other words, okay. And as I said, Canada is not the only country that run into that problem. So this is in France. As you can see, another engineer miscalculated. Now you have to appreciate, I don't know if you see that, there's some serious stonework that the train had to go through in order to get to this point. Okay? So that train must have been going at a really high speed in order to reach this point. Yeah? And this is a more recent picture. Anybody have seen this one? So this is a building in China that was built, so again, civil engineers kind of miscalculated kind of thing. So what ended up happening was this. The building was built kind of like that, okay? And then they were filling on one side and digging on the other. And so the building collapsed on the side. Wow. Fortunately, it collapsed when there was nobody in there. Nobody had moved in yet, okay? But the whole building collapsed flat. All right. So this is why we have regulatory bodies. Okay. But the need to protect the public is universal. The way we have found, the approach we have chosen in Canada made complete sense at that time. Other countries chose different approaches because their context was different at the time. And so that's kind of the idea. So the mandate of regulatory bodies is obviously to protect the public and monitoring the services provided by their members, making sure that people do their job fundamentally. And so it's a mandate from the government. The government gives it to the regulatory bodies. The government can take it back if it considers that the regulatory bodies don't do their job properly. That has happened in Quebec recently. I can't remember which regulatory body people decide, the Quebec government decided, you guys not doing a good job, we'll take it back. Okay? So it can happen. And so there is an advantage and a disadvantage of being a regulatory body, because obviously the responsibility is placed on the people. From a society perspective, this is great, because it's a fairly cheap way of regulating, of making sure things are done well. Okay? But the regulatory body has to be monitored to some extent, or self-monitor. Okay? So, from a counselor perspective, if people have a goal to go back in their profession, first of all, ask them why do they want that license or their registration, because as we've discussed, some people want it because you must have it, and again, if it's the goal by itself, that's not a good reason. If it's a step towards something specific, then it is a good reason. Okay? But there's one important point. as a counselor. Virtually all regulatory bodies have, as part of their process to evaluate the qualifications of foreign trained professionals, a step by which you will have to describe the work you've done before. And this is where many immigrants run into difficulties because they will describe their experience as broad again. And what happens? It doesn't work. The people will read those descriptions, or if it's in the case of PO, the people who will interview those people will conclude you were not doing the kind of work we regulate. So making sure that people, when they fill those forms to get assessed by their regulatory body, do it in a way that is consistent with Canadian culture, meaning they show that they communicate the fact that they're specialists. They communicate what problem they were solving, how they solved the problem, and the difference they made. Those are fundamental elements. And you as counselors can really help them. Now, you won't be able to help them write it. Because like you can't, like if a nurse was asking me like, how do I write? I don't know. Okay? But what you can do is making sure that they contact people in their field and run those descriptions by them. Because that will make a world of difference. Is everybody with me on this point? Okay. So you cannot have them write those things specifically, but you can definitely tell whether they're trying to say, I can do everything, or no, I'm trying to do something very specific, or I did something very specific. So if they do, so this is the idea, help them describe their professional experience in a way that generates a positive reaction from regulators, as opposed to a negative reaction. So also help, if they really, if it's clearly a step towards their goal, well then help them create a plan. And just like in your case, the plan is, no, master's degree is not really the plan. The designation will be part of the plan. Volunteering will be part of the plan. I don't know if you need courses specific to corporate communications, like that might be the case. Again, it would be course, not degree. Okay? Reading books, networking with people who do that, definitely would all be part of that plan. So there's one thing. In Ontario, there is the Ontario Fairness Commissioner. I don't know if any of you has heard of Fairness Commissioners. So I think that we're going to have one in Alberta, if I understand correctly. Okay. So the Fairness Commissioner is somebody who makes their job is to make sure that regulatory bodies have processes that are fair, transparent, equitable, and timely. If I remember the 4 keywords. Okay. So in Ontario, the interactions between the Fairness Commissioner and regulatory bodies tend to be adversarial. Let's put it this way. Yeah, it's like, and so as a result, the regulatory bodies have actually kind of grouped together, and they created an association called the Ontario Regulators for Access Consortium. And if you go on their website, now lately I couldn't find it.
In Alberta, it's the Alberta Ombudsman.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Same thing.
Same concept, okay. So, but I think the relationship between the Ombudsman and regulatory bodies is more collaborative here. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
They can still dictate terms to the regulatory body.
Yeah, but I think they do it in, they don't behave like a police officer.
Right.
Yeah, no.
That's what's going on in Ontario. Okay. So the idea is, ORAC is the acronym for the association. They have a website, and in there is a part of the website which is an online orientation to regulatory bodies in Ontario. And I can tell you, because I created that one with my wife, you can replace every time there's the word Ontario, you replace it with Alberta, and honestly, everything will apply. Because it doesn't get into such details that you will end up with seeing the differences. Okay? So this can be very helpful for counselors when you're dealing with people who work in regulated professions. You can tell them, go watch this, like go through that part of the website, and that will save, and come back to me with questions. that it's designed to save you a lot of time that way. And for applicants or clients to be able to go into the details.